So my name's Nancy Proctor. I'm the director of the Peale. I would like to thank you again for your patience as we get started here. We are recording this session, and the recording will be available on our website, and there will also be a full transcript available next week. In case of any technical difficulties, a backup Zoom link will be provided to all participants. So if you RSVP'd, you will get it by email, and we will also post instructions on the web page where you are watching this broadcast. I would like to start by very much thanking my colleagues who made all this work behind the scenes. Robin Marquis, the Peale's Accessibility Coordinator, Heather Shelton, our manager of all things online, and David London, our Chief Experience Officer. This event's going to last about an hour, and you are very welcome to participate at any point by typing your questions and your comments into the chat box that I believe you are seeing on the web page where you are watching this from. And let's see, I should also note that we do have a wonderful interpreter signing for us today, Antonio. We thank him for being here. We also have this session being live cart transcribed by Kathy. So thank you again for that. If you have any, need any technical help during the session, you can email us at online@thepealecenter.org. You can also reach us on social media. We are at the Peale on Twitter and Facebook, and the Peale Baltimore on Instagram. I'd also like to begin this event by acknowledging with humility that the lands where the Peale and Baltimore are situated today are the traditional, ancestral, and unceded lands of the Piscataway, Lenape, and Susquehannock indigenous peoples. The vast coastal area today known as Baltimore City, Maryland, sustained indigenous peoples until the arrival of Europeans beginning in the 1600s.
Hey, Nancy, I need to interrupt you just for a minute. We can't, the interpreter is not showing. Only your screen is showing on the live feed.
Thank you very much for telling me, and I know how to fix that. Okay. Hopefully now everybody can see the interpreter. That should be coming. So I will paste this text into the chat for anybody who missed the beginning of it. But I will continue by noting that the unceded lands on which the Peale and Baltimore City are currently situated were decimated over the 400 years after the arrival of the Europeans, and many peoples were absorbed by larger villages or tribes and or forced by the U.S. federal government to move west beyond the Mississippi with larger tribes. Since then, other tribal peoples have moved here in diaspora, including the Lumbee peoples. On January 9th, 2012, two tribes of Piscataway, the Piscataway Conoy tribe and the Piscataway Indian Nation, became the first tribes recognized by the state of Maryland. In 2017, the state also recognized the Akahannock Indian tribe. We acknowledge that the Peale stands on stolen lands, and I would also like to acknowledge that this history and thanks were adapted from an original text authored by Ryan A. Kuntz, Peter Dayton, and Ashley Minner of the Lumbee tribe. So with that, I would like to thank and introduce Audra Buck-Coleman. Dr. Buck-Coleman is an associate professor at the University of Maryland College Park, and she's the project director for the Redefinable project. I had the very great pleasure of getting to know Audra's amazing work back in 2016 when I learned about the Be More Than the Story exhibition that she helped facilitate at the Reginald Lewis Museum, working with high school students in Baltimore as they created an exhibition to express their responses to police surveillance in the wake of the uprisings and the murder.
Freddie Gray.
Thank you. I was suddenly having a blank of Freddie Gray.
It's been so many, I mean, it's easy to do.
Yeah, exactly. I would also like to thank Audra for the work that she's done with the Peale since then. She has a wonderful manner of working in a very grassroots way, creating a platform and an opportunity for communities to share their stories and really create the events that they want. And so she did precisely that, working with the Peale, starting in 2017, running through 2018 on the Say It Like It Is project, which was led by Baltimore City high school students who also collaborated with undergraduate students at Johns Hopkins University. So this program as well, Redefinable, is driven in this very community grassroots way, very much a product of the voices and the stories that the Peale is here to help share. And thank you so much, Audra, for bringing us all together for that. And I'm now going to turn off my video and hand over to you.
Nancy, this is Heather. Before you get started, if you could please go to gallery view so you can see multiple presenters.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
And also, Nancy, if you can take just a minute and describe yourself.
Oh, yes. Thank you for reminding me to do that. So I will just momentarily put my video back on. So I am a middle-aged white woman today wearing glasses, and I have sort of blonde hair, and I'm wearing a wonderful Baltimore designed and produced shirt, I must say. And because I am a little bit confused right now, I'm not going to remember that designer's name either, but I will find it and send it to you. If anybody's interested. I am pictured in front of an image of the Peale Center on a beautiful June day, bright sun, blue skies, little puffy white clouds, and Jeffrey Kent's paintings, Black Lives Matter paintings, across the front windows of the ground floor of the Peale building. So that's me. And with that, thank you again, Audra. I'll hand over to you.
Of course, thank you. So thank you, Nancy, for that lovely introduction. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this panel discussion about how COVID-19 is redefining exhibits and inclusion. In our efforts to be inclusive and accessible, we've had just a little technical bumps, trying to figure out this process is challenging and a little bit nerve-wracking. So thanks for your patience with all of that. If you are continuing to have any technical difficulties, please just add that to the chat. Hopefully you can see the presenters and you're seeing the interpreter. And again, you've gotten some information about how to access other information, accessibility information in that chat. So again, thank you for joining us today. We're excited to have you as part of this panel on COVID-19 and thinking about redefining exhibits and inclusion. I am a white female, also middle-aged with light brown hair. I use the pronoun she, her, and hers. I'm wearing a white shirt with a black sort of floral pattern, and I'm joining you today from Fort Collins, Colorado. And instead of some sort of like beautiful mountainous image behind me, I just have sort of a neutral kind of wall. So there you go, that's who I am. And before we get to the program, I do need to share a few more words of thanks. I know we're running a little bit behind, but it's really important to acknowledge all the fabulous voices and people who've been a part of the project. So first, of course, thank you to our financial supporters, which include Maryland Humanities, the Arts and Humanities Research Council in the United Kingdom, the Institute of Museum and Library Services, and the University of Maryland College Park Friedgen Family Fund. Any views, findings, conclusions, or recommendations expressed in this project and also in this event do not necessarily represent those of these organizations and institutions. I also want to say thank you to Sabrina Epstein, Yoshi Nakamura, Joel Olson, and Marguerite Woods. They generously added their voices to the Redefinable Challenging Inaccessibility Project. You can access that project online at redefine-able.thepealecenter.org. So you can find more information. You're right there, pretty close in your browser. So definitely, if you haven't already, take a look and hear their great stories and contributions to the project. Thank you also to Dr. Cheryl Fogel-Hatch, Molly Greenberg, Ruth Losner, and Robin Marquis, who during the 2019-2020 academic year, collaborated with my students at University of Maryland and served as sounding boards, knowledge experts, and just all-around friends of the project. Your participation, their participation has strengthened the Redefinable project in so many ways. And finally, I want to say a huge thank you to the students of University of Maryland Graphic Design, the 2020 cohort that came along for this journey about ableism and diversity inclusion. We had some unexpected bumps along the way, not the least of which was the pandemic, but the students stayed the course. You produced some amazing work. You approached the project with an open mind. You challenged each other and myself on what accessibility and inclusion means and might mean. And you designed some really innovative ways to share that information in an exhibit. I'm just proud to have been your professor. So with that, I want to talk just briefly about a little bit more what is redefinable, challenging inaccessibility. And we began that project with the goal of sharing the challenges and successes and stories of Maryland's disability communities. And if you have a story to tell, you can do that on the Peale site. If you go up to the top of your browser, you have some options for storytelling and leaving your stories there. We also wanted to interrogate the idea of normal and what that means when within a historical, a cultural, and ethical context. And then we wanted to create ways for the exhibits and other information delivery, how they might be more accessible. And we intended for this project to manifest as an exhibit in two physical spaces, the Carroll Mansion in Baltimore and the Herman Merrill Gallery on the University of Maryland College Park campus, and also on an online space. So we had two physical spaces we were planning for and one online. However, 2 weeks before we were set to open, the restrictions started and the venues closed as a result of the pandemic. And so Redefinable has now pivoted to become an online social media exhibit, again, due to COVID-19, which sort of prompts the discussion that we're going to have today. Of course, ours is not the only exhibit that's been disrupted during the pandemic, not to mention the lives, systems, and livelihoods that have been negatively affected as well. This disease has brought sickness and pain to too many lives across the world. The havoc that COVID-19 has wreaked and continue to wreak is frustrating, anger-inducing, and heartbreaking. It's with that havoc in mind that we want to have a discussion about how we as curators, artists, exhibition designers, museum staff, and just citizens of the world take stock of the pandemic, speculate on what the future might hold, and share knowledge about how to be more accessible and inclusive. And although Redefinable focuses on disability and ability, the ideas of accessibility and inclusion apply to all minority groups and communities. Disability is not a mutually exclusive category. Anyone, no matter what age, race, gender, or other category of human diversity, can have or develop a disability. And the intersectionality of different identities and experiences can bring even more challenges to vulnerable populations. And so with that, we're framing this as a broad conversation about diversity, inclusion, and accessibility. So next, I want to introduce our panelists. So I will start with Jeffrey Kent. Jeffrey Kent is a multidisciplinary artist based in Baltimore, Maryland. Many of Mr. Kent's artistic works confront the accessibility of contemporary art, racial oppression, and ideas of freedom and identity. He develops live performances and community investment projects and is currently artistic director for the Peale. Hello and welcome, Jeffrey, who is joining us from Baltimore. Thank you for being a part of this panel. Would you just take a minute to briefly describe yourself and the environment you are joining us from?
Wow. Thank you for that introduction. I hope that my voice is coming through. Right as you were giving the introduction, I'm sitting next to my router, my Xfinity Comcast router that is really not doing a very good job right now. It's just unbelievable. But, okay, my name again is Jeffrey Kent. A description of myself, I guess I'm middle-aged. I'm African-American. I put up the quote signs for that. And of dark complexion with no hair on my head. I'm wearing square-shaped glasses, and I have on a V-neck t-shirt with my company logo and website on it, which is byartforyou.com. And I'm in an environment that I created 4 years ago, my art complex, I call it, the 120. It's my artist studio space. I'm on the second floor level in Studio C. And it has a background. There's a book stand behind me with a few paintings on the wall, which is turquoise. And there are multiple colors in the background. And there's a long hallway behind me that goes into Studio A on the second floor of my art complex.
That sounds great. Thank
Hopefully
you
that
so
came
much,
through.
Jeffrey. All right, thank you, Jeffrey. So next I would like to introduce Dr. Lara Perry. She is the Deputy Head of School of Humanities of the School of Humanities at the University of Brighton in the United Kingdom. So Lara joins us from the United Kingdom. She's a Principal Investigator of a UK Arts and Humanities Research Council funded UK-US collaborative research project on the digital prospects for inclusive civic and historic museums. Hello and welcome to Lara, again, who's joining us from the United Kingdom. Thank you too for being a part of this panel today. And could you take a moment to just briefly describe yourself and the environment from which you're joining us?
Sure, thank you very much, Audra. I am a 50-ish white woman, and I have very white hair and a white t-shirt and a navy jacket to try and introduce some variation in that. And I have a background on my Zoom screen, which is a photograph that I've taken of the park that's behind my house, where I've spent a lot of time lately. And it's a beautiful sunny day in the South Downs National Park.
All right. Thank you so much, Lara. And last but certainly not least is Beth Ziebarth. She is the Director of Access Smithsonian. In this position, Ms. Ziebarth develops and implements accessibility policy and guidelines for the institution's 19 museums, the National Zoo, and 9 research centers. Her work includes staff training on accessibility and disability topics, facility and program technical assistance, directing accessibility services, outreach and collaboration, and 5 signature programs for people with disabilities. Hello and welcome to Beth. And again, thank you for being a part of this panel as well. Could you briefly describe yourself and the environment from which you're joining us?
Thank you, Audra. Sure. I am a 60-year-old, light-skinned white woman with short blonde hair. I'm wearing glasses and a turquoise embroidered blouse. And in the background is a kind of gradient purple color with the words "Museums Change Lives."
All right. Thank you so much, Beth. So we're delighted to have these panelists join us for the event today. Our goal is for this to be a conversation about exhibits, inclusion, and accessibility. With this, panelists, I encourage you to ask questions of each other. Audience members, I encourage you to ask questions using the chat function. And one more housekeeping bit before we begin. After I'm asked this first question, I'm going to mute my video feed. This should enable, hopefully we're going to get the 4 screens with the interpreter and then the 3 panelists up. By having only 4 screens, it should enable those 4 to be larger. So I'll still be posing questions. I haven't left, but anyway, so I'll just be muting my video in just a moment. So. All right, here we go. We're underway. So for the first question, I think I just want to establish what do we mean by exhibits? So I'd love for each of you to define, to give your definition of what an exhibit means. And has COVID-19 influenced how you define exhibits? You can thumb wrestle virtually. No. How about Beth? You're still on the screen for me. How about, would you like to answer that question first?
Sure. I think that, I was always taught that exhibits were the components that go into an exhibition. So I kind of make that distinction, between a full-fledged exhibition and then exhibits. But exhibits typically are a collection of objects or stories or places. It can even be a place. And it can be a physical space. It can be online, which is particularly important now in the COVID era. So that's my definition.
All right, thank you. Laura, how about you?
Yeah, I would agree with all of those things. And I would add that there's an element of selection that goes into an exhibition that includes a bit of thinking about how a kind of process or a sequence through which an audience might encounter the individual components and what that and how that sequence brings some meaning or some stimulation to the visitor through that arrangement.
All right. Jeffrey, how about you? As an artist, do you have a different take or something else to add? What would you like to say?
Please repeat that question once more, because I was reading over the other questions and I kind of lost
Sure.
track.
Just how do you define exhibit or exhibition? So Beth is, has very defined specific definitions of that. But as an artist and an artistic director, what is an exhibit to you?
For me, an exhibit is a conversation that creates questions. It's a visual conversation that creates questions. But for me, an exhibit is to create dialogue, whatever the subject may be. And I think for me, that's what I feel the definition of an exhibition is a collection of visual stimulation that can create questions and change.
All right. Thank you for that. Laura, I have a question for you now. You have
Sure.
You and Kevin Bacon of the Royal Pavilion and Museums in Brighton. You wrote an author that's actually on the Redefinable site, and it addresses the state of accessibility in museums and cultural institutions. And you were so timely, and you wrote so much of that before COVID, all right? And thinking about accessibility before the pandemic hit. What are some takeaways, some big thoughts or pieces from that? Just thinking about where were the strengths before COVID and where were some opportunities for improvement?
So when I was preparing and writing that essay with Kevin for Redefinable, one of the points that came through strongly for me was the extent to which in the UK the physical sites of exhibitions are so important to the organizations that host them, and actually the extent to which the physical location kind of becomes a historic artifact or becomes part of the exhibition itself. And that was very important in that essay because there's actually some very strong limitations on how organizations can alter the physical spaces that they're using for exhibitions and for heritage activities in order to try and preserve the physical heritage of the country. So before COVID, that was the main things that I was thinking about in terms of accessibility. And since COVID, I've been thinking a lot about how important the digital access to those spaces and the things in them became. It's really clear that museums are an important part of the community, not just physically, but also emotionally and culturally, and how the kind of standards of what's on websites for museums did or didn't meet the expectations and needs of a wide range of audiences during this time. We've got in the UK, because of the European Union, some very explicit requirements around accessibility of material that's posted on websites that is just coming into use right now. But so much of the material that museums produce isn't really available through those mechanisms right now. So there's a big gap between the very rich resources that are present in the UK and what can be accessed at the moment.
All right, thank you. Beth, as Access Smithsonian Director, kind of how would you assess the state of accessibility pre-COVID? and maybe include some initiatives that the Smithsonian was undertaking before the pandemic?
Sure. I think that our facilities and museum buildings in particular, some of the ones that the Smithsonian has, make a strong statement and connection to collections and stories. So when you think about the architecture of the National Museum of the American Indian, or the architecture of the National Museum of African American History and Culture, I mean, those structures are really statements about what the museum is about, not only because of their locations, with the National Museum of African American History and Culture being very close to the Ellipse and the White House grounds, and the National Museum of the American Indian being our closest museum to the US Capitol. So those locations are important. We have, of course, the collections and the exhibitions in the physical buildings that we have been working on in terms of accessibility. And I think program access, physical access, in many respects is easier than program access, and making sure that what you provide is effective communication for a wide range of people. And so it's the physical aspects of programs like exhibitions or public programs or digital experiences, and thinking about as we have pivoted to more online programming to replace the ability to visit the museums in person, we have 54, I think it's 54 million objects in our collection. And so the challenge for us is not only, on the open access side and making sure that everybody has the ability to access the collections that we put up online, but also to make our materials that we've developed for families and children and adults, that they are accessible to everybody who wants to use them. And I am particularly driven to make sure that what we put up for children, for K through 12 students is available, because the US has not really done a great job of dealing with the fact that kids with disabilities are not really benefiting from online teaching experiences. And so whatever we can do to supplement what is coming out of schools, I think is really important. So I think that's kind of the state that we are currently in. We have work to do, there's no question. But we have certainly made a lot of strides over the years, and I think that I'm lucky in that there are so many staff members who are interested in ensuring that the museums are accessible to all.
Great, thank you. So I want to go to Jeffrey next. Jeffrey, from an artistic standpoint, Beth just talked about some of the ways that, for example, the Smithsonian has tried to make accommodations during COVID. But how has COVID influenced you, and maybe what you consider making as an artist and what you might consider installing as an artistic director?
Okay, so as an artist, I would say I'm in a very fortunate seat as an artist, and especially as an artist who was raised in marginalized communities and public educated in Baltimore. I'm in a very fortunate seat. With what I'm making, COVID hasn't affected my decisions for what I'm making, because I've already been on what I call my life's work as far as what I'm making for my artwork practice. And because I'm a multidisciplinary artist, and because of my learning differences and ADD and all the different things that I have had and work with in my daily life, I have many projects to keep me busy. And I've already, as I said, before COVID had hit, I was already working on this really large project, which is like going to take a decade or more to finish. And I started it almost 5 or 6 years ago. So it's not really affecting the way that I'm making art. And as far as the way that I select exhibitions with the Peale, prior to the pandemic, we're already planning an exhibition around inheritance. We're working with a young Caucasian female artist that work is informed by her white privilege. And this is something we started prior to George Floyd's murder and prior to the pandemic. And it's really interesting how timely this exhibition will be. Again, it's not specifically around the pandemic, but it does face and address a lot of the issues around the disparity and marginalized people versus, I won't say all white people, because white people are marginalized also. And that's why I really like using that term, because it really is, it encompasses everyone. I don't like to use terms like people of color and things like that, because it still separates white people from everybody else. And I just don't see the point of ending racism if you're always separating instead of bringing everyone together. So that's just my personal view. But Kim Rice is the artist's name, by the way. And it's going to be a very informative exhibition around the differences in all of the policies that have made her life such a great life versus the life of marginalized people. And it's the same way with these pandemic right now. People that live in marginalized communities are the ones that are being hurt the worst with this pandemic, especially here in America. And I'm sure it's the same everywhere, because it's an international pandemic, racism. And it's been a very long time, been around a very long time. Hopefully I answered that question.
You did, Jeffrey. Thank you so much. And we look forward to Kim Rice's exhibition. So we'll have to keep watching the Peale to see when we can be treated to that project. So thank you for that. So during the Redefinable project, one of the tools my students used was an app called Sim-Daltonism. And for those who aren't familiar, this is a free app that you can use with a smartphone that shows what color palettes are going to be visible and discernible to those who have color blindness. And I can imagine that maybe some of the audiences out there today are wondering sort of what are some tools and resources, particularly ones that maybe have a lower cost, that you're tapping into to help you create more accessible and inclusive spaces. Anything, and we can also sort of also use the chat function for those who have suggestions both on and off the panel to share with those ideas with others as well. But again, posing to the panelists, maybe Beth, I'll ask you first. Just are there some tools that others might be able to resource to make accessible, inclusive exhibits?
Sure. One of the ones that I think is going to be particularly useful for us as we reopen our museums, and our visitors will have to interact with the space in a very different way, with social distancing, and areas of exhibitions may be blocked off because they're too small to accommodate a number of people. If there may be like one direction through a museum, those things will be techniques that they can use to help control any of the things that can increase, the likelihood of communicating COVID-19 among visitors. So I think that Ira, spelled AIRA, is a service that we have been using for a year now. It is an app that you can download. We have a lot of subscribers in the DC metropolitan area and probably Baltimore too, because it's really kind of a number of people who are blind or have low vision who use this service are in this area. And with the app, a live agent is able to use the camera on the smartphone to be able to see the environment that a person who's blind or has low vision is in. And so when I started thinking about how are we going to communicate what all these signs say that we're putting up in museums to people who are blind or have low vision, and deal with the social distancing issues so that the person who's blind or has low vision is safe, in addition to just making sure that other visitors are feeling safe too. So I think that the use of something like Ira can really be helpful. And we have free minutes for anybody who uses the app within the geofence Smithsonian area. The National Zoo also has Ira, and that's one tool that we'll use. But there are things that the visitor services team are thinking about too, and that's using an app on a smartphone again for being able to help with communication with people who have hearing loss. So the clear masks will be something that we'll use, but that still is difficult for somebody who is trying to speech read to really get a good sense of the movement of the mouth through that clear mask. And so the app for somebody with hearing loss will augment that and make the communication clearer. So we're just starting to explore like all these kinds of tools that we can use on the visitor services end. And then once we get into exhibitions, then we have to really think about like how we're making sure that we are addressing the touch-based digital interactives. And I think we're going to talk about that a little bit more in the conversation later.
All right. Thank you, Beth.
Yeah.
Laura, Jeffrey, anything to add there?
Well, one of the things I found very interesting is the clear mask and the difficulty for people to read Braille because you have to touch it. And so I'm wondering, how will we address that issue?
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in on that, Jeffrey. I think that with Braille, that there's been some good studies done on how long COVID lives on different kinds of materials, paper versus plastic versus metal, etc. And one of the things that our visitor services folks are doing is we're not going to be handing out brochures anymore. So there will be actually fewer things that will be handed out with Braille, and there will be more reliance on material being on the websites and for people to access the material, during their visit on a website. So it is a concern. Like if we have Braille with a tactile element, then we need to make sure that, those things are part of the cleaning protocol, that not only are we cleaning surfaces like elevator buttons and door handles, etc., but we're also looking at anything that people are allowed to touch in exhibitions. So.
Thank you, Beth. So Laura, I know that you had a study and you're still in the early stages of it, but was looking at how different museums, institutions were representing exhibition content during the pandemic. So if you can, do you have any sort of insights you'd like to share? I know your early days in your data collection and analysis, but just any trends, tools, resources that you see there, or just, that might be helpful here?
Oh, we don't have that kind of level of detailed analysis happening yet, but I do have something I was thinking about in relation to what Jeffrey said about exhibitions as conversations, and the kind of discussion that we're having right now about how do you move that conversation into a safe place, right? So one way to do it is to let people have their conversations from whatever their safe place is, and create a kind of replica of those spaces for them to use as part of that discussion, which is something I think the Peale has been doing quite a lot of work on, in terms of developing, kind of alternate ways of experiencing the space. But then what Beth is talking about, and the other question that Jeffrey had about Braille is, well, if the people are in the space, then how can you facilitate those conversations, given that actually we use a lot of artificial substitutes for human voice, if you like, text and written and Braille, that are about creating an avatar for the person who might be speaking. So I guess that's two different ways of thinking about the issues that that museums and exhibition spaces have. Is do you let the conversations happen in the organic way, but not in the spaces that you normally use? Or do you give people access to those spaces, but try and change the opportunities that they have for having conversations with the staff and with each other, other visitors, as they're experiencing that space? There's a museum in Amsterdam that's been offering phone calls to people about art, and people can choose any member of staff. They can choose the person who cleans the floors or the director of the museum to phone up on a Friday afternoon. They're all available on Friday afternoons to have conversations about artworks in the museum. So they've kind of taken they've said it's not really the exhibition that matters, it's the conversation, and that's what we're going to provide, and we're just going to do it on the phone. So there's some really creative practice emerging to try and tackle some of these very, very challenging issues that are, they're existential issues for museums. And it's really exciting to see how stimulated everybody is to try and meet these challenges and meet audiences' needs.
Mhm.
All right, thank you for that. So my next question is going to build off of yours, Lara, in terms of in your last comment, just in terms of what are some of the benefits that we've seen from COVID. But first, we're going to pause just for a second. Antonio is our fabulous interpreter. And Antonio, I've sent you a private chat message. If you can take a break for just one quick moment and take a look at that and respond to me, and then we'll get back. But I want Antonio just to have 1 minute to check this. Okay. All right. So thank you. So we started a little bit late. We had some technical difficulties, so we wanted to make sure that Antonio was fine to keep signing past our 1 o'clock Eastern deadline. And so for those of you who need to sign off, we understand, but we'll keep going maybe another 15 minutes, just so I'm getting to a really lovely conversation. So back to Laura's comment and thinking about what are some of the positive things that maybe have come out. We're rethinking, we're redefining what it means to be an exhibit, what it means to be inclusive, what are the best practices. And so, yeah, so Laura, maybe if there are other things you want to add, you've sort of already answered the question, but anything else on that topic of kind of what's some of the good that's come from COVID?
For me, the thing that I've been talking to colleagues about, that's really been coming out is the foregrounding of the importance of relationships. So what Jeffrey said about conversations, and maybe to put it into a slightly broader framework, relationships between museums and visitors, and actually how multidimensional they are, how emotional they are, how responsive and responsible they are, the importance of community building through the kind of interactions that museums facilitate. I think museums are often, we kind of think of them as places for learning, and I don't want to marginalize learning in this conversation, but I think there's a lot more to them. So, this project that Jeffrey's doing coming up at the Peale, that sense that there's urgent conversations to be had about being an artist, what it means to be an artist in a community, that is part of a really important conversation that's being facilitated in lots of different ways at the moment, but museums can play such an important role in that.
All right, thank you. Jeffrey, how about you? Any sort of good, obviously you've got the Kim Rice exhibit that really maybe has even more finer point in terms of relevance and importance. Any other ways that you see COVID shaking things up, making us rethink our daily practices?
Some of the things I feel that have benefited is the access to things like films, which you normally would have to pay to see. Now, some museums are making them available online. I think one of the pitfalls with that is that everyone doesn't have access to the internet. And so that's one of the things that we have to consider and figure out a way to make that accessibility available for more, because as Beth had mentioned, I believe, it's difficult to get online. If you can't see, it's not as easy to be able to experience things. So I think that with the pandemic, it has made museums really, prior to the pandemic, museums were doing all the work that they've been doing, which has been great work. But since the pandemic, it's forced museums to really hone in on all of their strategies. And I think that's one of the benefits that has come out of this, is that it's forced all institutions, not just museums, but all institutions to really think deeply about strategies of how to make things more accessible for everyone. Because of the pandemic and George Floyd, I'm sorry to repeat this again, it's brought to light all of the problems that we've had for many, many years for people who have disabilities, which again, as we say, race is a disability for some people. So it has forced us to be more considerate.
All right, thank you. Beth, you were already there so much with Access Smithsonian, but are there other things that you're really realizing or rethinking during the pandemic?
Yeah, specifically in the work that my office does with the museum education departments on some of our programs. So our program called See Me at the Smithsonian, which is for individuals with dementia and their care partners. This pivot to doing the programming online is actually, it has increased the accessibility of our programming to this audience. And it's because we've taken away some of the barriers that they were experiencing in terms of transportation, in terms of just being able to move about in a museum. And we've had some, just really terrific, very focused discussions. The way we do this program, we usually choose like 2 objects to discuss in an hour and 15 minutes. And it's, 2 pieces of art or to museum, like history collection objects. And it's just been something that we've realized that when we are in the post-vaccine world, that we'll continue doing the same online programming because it provides an additional way to meet the accessibility needs of the audience. So that's I think part of the whole new normal in museums is that we will have much more of an emphasis on doing things both in the museums and online.
All right, thank you so much. So Beth, I have 2 questions from you from our audience chat. The first one is specifically for you. The app you spoke about is specifically for people with hearing loss, the AIRA.LO, is that correct?
It's actually an app for people who are blind or have low vision. It is meant to be a way to connect with somebody, a live agent through your phone, who can help you with orientation and mobility through an unfamiliar space. And they can also describe objects that are on display.
So I misread the question of the question. So is there also one for people with hearing loss? You spoke about 2 apps and you spoke about the AIRA, but what was the second one you want for people with hearing loss?
Yeah, there's a number of them out there. And right now I think that our visitor services staff are looking at live caption, but there's also Otter AI, which is another way to use an app for hearing loss. And it is basically a speech to text type of app. So the challenge will be, if we're using these apps, how are we going to make that that text available to the person who has hearing loss, and the communication between the visitor service person and the person who has hearing loss, it's, and still maintain social distance. So we're working out some of those issues.
Right. Thank you. And then one more question from the audience is there research on digital Braille? Are any of you aware of any research on digital Braille?
No, it's a kind of an interesting idea. So why would we do Braille digitally if you would be able to use a screen reader to read text instead? I'm just trying to figure out, like, what's the advantage of digital Braille?
I think that's the answer, is that you have the speech to text, or the text to speech, say.
Yeah.
Dyslexia.
I'm getting more clarification on the context of the question. So the haptic display is early in development and it's currently at low resolution. Mm-hmm. Sound waves produce puffs of air that can be felt on the palm. That's different from reading with the fingertips. And maybe somebody who's also deaf-blind, just thinking about the technologies that might be needed for those pieces. But thank you to Cheryl Fogle-Hatch for the question. So any other research that we know, or sort of technology that might be coming along?
Well, Cheryl brings up a good point with the haptics. And I know that we have a Smithsonian Accessibility Innovation Fund, and in our last round of funding, we gave money to one of our staff members who is going to be exploring haptics in exhibitions to meet the needs of providing a tactile kind of experience, but through haptics rather than actually touching like a 3D model. So I think it's a really promising area. It's expensive right now, but I think that, like with any technology, as time goes by, we're going to see this the costs come down, especially if we can really get this, embedded in museums.
One of the articles that you shared with us, Audra, actually had some really interesting material on gestural, thinking about overcoming that, where touch, which has become such an important part of museum practice, because in the years since that we've thought about vision as a kind of prioritized sensory engagement, and trying to think about ways that museums can maintain relationships or foster relationships between visitors and their other senses and the collections. So as touch becomes dangerous, risky in a viral pandemic, what are the kinds of other sensory activities or that can replace touch? And one of them is about gesture, right? So you're moving, but not necessarily actually coming to touch objects or screens or things that other people are using, together with, and that's quite advanced kind of gaming technology, isn't it? And virtual reality technology to be able to use the movements of the body to control things externally. So it's exciting, and it might bring it into greater use. Sometimes these things that are very expensive and unusual technologies can suddenly become much more important and in demand and available when in circumstances where there's a lot of need for them.
Yeah, I just wanted to add on for a moment that I really view these strategies that museums are developing right now as being, there's the immediate short-term strategy, pre-vaccine, that we have to consider, and then the longer-term post-vaccine strategies, the new normal. And I'm really hoping that even though we have health and safety issues currently with tactile experiences or interactive experiences, that we don't say, oh, can't do those anymore. We're not gonna invest in any of the things that we've been fighting for like 40 years in terms of multisensory and multimodal experiences in museums. So I feel like that's kind of my full-time job right now, is like really trying to push back on the idea that we just will stop having people touch things. It's like, what are you talking about? We can't do that.
I'm glad you're standing up for that, Beth.
Both sort of bring us to our final question. There was a recent Design Week article that suggests some of the changes that museums are going to be making in terms of eliminating, eliminating touch, maybe one way, more directional traffic, reducing the amount of time of materials viewers need to digest in a space. Maybe there's more take-home material. So is there anything else you'd like to add, maybe that you haven't covered? Like, what does a post-COVID future hold? In what ways will you engage audiences differently, if at all? And Jeffrey, I might sort of ask you to maybe start us off with that. So you've talked a little bit about doesn't change your artistic practice, but does it change for you in terms of museums and engaging audiences?
Most definitely. One of the things that I think is that's being considered, that I know we do it with the Peale, which by the way is the first architectural building in America that was designed to be a museum. Just got to put that in there. Art-focused institutions are making many of the same changes as informational-based venues. As discussed earlier, some of the changes include, well, it hadn't been discussed earlier, but sliding scale entrance fees is one of the things that we do with the Peale. If we had an event, this is pre-COVID, and I'm sure will continue post-COVID, if someone comes to one of our events and they can't afford the entrance fee, we're not going to send them away. We're very community oriented, and it's very important that everyone is included, no matter what their financial status is. We want to do, I think museums also need to consider post-COVID later hours for more access to marginalized communities and people with disability. meaning that they may not open at 10 a.m., maybe they'll open at 1 p.m. after lunch and continue, instead of closing at 4:30 or 5 p.m., going on to 6:30, 7 p.m. so that because people who live in marginalized communities have to work during the day. They don't have access to be able to go to a museum in the middle of the day. So those are some of the things that I think museums need to work on more. And also the need to transcribe for videos content, transcripts for video content, and higher quality streaming technology is also going to be essential to get people attached and access to content.
All right. Thank you, Jeffrey. Lara, how about you? Post-COVID? What will
Oh, post-COVID. I mean, I think one of the things that's come up for me, actually in my job as a university teacher, as well as in my job as a researcher on museums, has been the question about, you know, our default accessibility tools are the internet and devices. And, you know, a bit like the question of how do we maintain touch, right? What are the exclusions that still continue, even though, you know, this is our alternate access? How does our alternate access still not provide accessibility for some people? I mean, we've grown our accessibility, right? For, like, as Beth was saying, people who can't travel in, that accessibility has grown, but there are some people who still aren't necessarily touched by that. And it also speaks to Jeffrey's point, right? I mean, it's great to have apps that can guide people with partial sighting, but if they don't have a mobile phone that can download them, or they don't have minutes to use them, then that's not going to help them very much. So I guess there's been a kind of foregrounding of how we answer questions about accessibility. Given that museums need their audiences as much as audiences need their museums, you know, so how do we strengthen those relationships in light of some of the kind of gaps that have been exposed by the current transition, as well as the gains that have been made?
All right, thank you, Lara. Beth, are museums still going to continue to change lives, as your background suggests? And if so, like, what is this post-COVID world going to be?
Yeah, museums definitely have a role as, you know, trusted voices for the public on, you know, the most important issues of our times. So, you know, people trust museums more than they trust the government. That's not too surprising, but I think that we need to make good use of that. And for me, the most important thing for us to really be thinking about, pre-vaccine, post-vaccine, that we need to be including the disability community, the voices of people with disabilities with lived experience, in what we are planning, and in whatever we are thinking would be a good tool to provide access. We can't do a good job on accessibility if we are not in touch with what the disability community thinks is important for them to be able to access what we offer.
Nothing is without us, right?
That's right.
Their slogan. So, all right, thank you so much for our panelists. We want to take just a couple minutes to get your feedback, audience, on two quick questions. I'm going to put the first one in the chat, and then I will read it as well. But what, if anything, did you learn from today's discussion? Maybe something that was new or discussed in a different way. Again, if would you just respond to that question in the chat, and I will give you a minute or so just to write your answers, and then I'll ask the second question. So panelists, we have about a 20-second delay on the live feed, so it may seem a little bit longer. So we're just waiting for that to come through. So, and then I'll ask the second question. And then the second question that I will put in the chat is, what, if anything, do you have questions about from today's discussion? Maybe something you would like more information about. So please go ahead and post your response in this chat. And again, I'll give the audience about a minute or so just to think about your response and put that in the chat window, please, if you will. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and say thank you to our panelists. Thank you so much, audience, for your feedback. If you want to continue, use the chat to, again, let us know what questions you have and maybe something you learned. And so something was new and discussed in a way that you hadn't been exposed to before. But thank you for that feedback. Thank you to the panelists. Audience members, you're also going to receive an email with a brief participant survey that's going to ask a few more in-depth questions. And we're doing that to provide some information on, how to shape some additional redefinable events. So we'd greatly appreciate your feedback on that. And so thank you to the panelists. Thank you again to the Peale. Please follow and like the project. We're at Redefine ABLE on Twitter, #RedefineABLE on Instagram, and redefine.able on Facebook. And of course, you can go to redefine-able.thepealecenter.org. There are more upcoming events, both for the Peale's general programming, but also too for Redefinable. I'm going to plug the Redefinable one, and I think Nancy Proctor is going to come and plug the others. But on Wednesday, next Wednesday, July 29th, from 4:30 to 6 p.m. Eastern, Cozy Dunn is going to lead a storytelling workshop entitled Rethinking Ability, a community storytelling workshop. The workshop is free and open to the public. You can find the registration link and more information under the What's On. If you see that link at the top of your browser, under the What's On tab. And so we look forward to seeing you at more Redefinable events soon. With that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Nancy.
Thank you, Audra. What a wonderful conversation. I'd like to thank the panelists as well, and also our interpreter, Antonio, and our CART transcriber, Catherine. Thank you for sticking with us and letting us run a little bit late. Very much appreciated. Also to the audience for your participation today. As Audra mentioned, we do have on Monday. It is the premiere of the mini documentary, Not Just a Game, The Story of Savage. We'll be playing at 3 o'clock, 3 to 4. It's a free presentation with a panel discussion among the film's producers from Tender Bridge and Just Stunt Productions after the film screening. And it's the story of a young Baltimore man who is a squeegee worker by day and is part of the Baltimore Banners hockey team. And it's about how that participation in that project has really impacted his life. So an important story to hear from a voice that all too frequently has been excluded from our cultural record. So I hope you'll all be able to join us. It's free. You can RSVP on our website. Also on our website, you'll be able to find the recording and the transcript of this presentation. And we will leave the chat up on this webpage where you've been watching the broadcast until tomorrow. So if you think of anything else you want to add, please do come in and type it in there. As Audra said, this is really important research material as well. So your voice and your thoughts are really valuable to us, and we're very grateful to you for contributing them. And I think with that we can wrap up. However, given my tendency to forget names, including my own, in these moments of presenting to the world, I do want to pause and ask if any of my colleagues would like to remind me of anything else I've forgotten.
Maybe just happy 88th, 30th anniversary.
Excellent. Yes. Good point, Beth. Thank you. All right. Thanks again, everybody. And we look forward to seeing you next week, I hope, at the next Redefinable event. Have a great weekend.
Awesome.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Enjoy life as much as possible.